Welcome to Breaking News to Trading Moves. We're looking at a specific headline today, one that's really centered on the aerospace sector. It's a corporate acquisition, and it points to a wider theme about, well, how the market is valuing the lifespan of an aircraft.
It does. It's a single transaction, but it highlights a much broader trend. We're looking at TransDigm Group, and they're making a move to acquire two companies, Jet Parts Engineering and Victor Sierra Aviation.
And the price tag on this it's specific. We're talking about approximately $2.2 billion.
Yeah, that's the number. And that figure does include some tax benefits, but still.
Still, $2.2 billion is a substantial commitment.
It's a very large allocation of capital. And the seller here is Vance Street Capital. To kind of frame what TransDigm is buying, those two businesses together, Jet Parts Engineering and Victor Sierra, they generated about $280 million in revenue in 2025.
Okay, so let's do the math on that for a second. You've got TransDigm, and their ticker is TDG, spending over $2 billion to bring in $280 million in revenue. That's, what, roughly an 8 times revenue multiple? That feels high.
It is high, especially if you compare it to general industrials. But in this very specific niche of aerospace, a multiple like that tells you something about the quality of that revenue.
That it's durable, high margin.
Exactly. It suggests the market believes this revenue is here to stay, and it's very profitable.
So we need to look at the why. What's the logic behind a buy like this? Why is that revenue worth such a premium?
Well, the headline itself gives us the first clue. It says, this expands TransDigm into the aerospace aftermarket, and it specifically highlights proprietary alternative parts.
Proprietary alternative parts. Okay, let's break down what that actually means.
I think a good analogy is the pharmaceutical industry. You have the big drug companies who invent a medication. They're like the original equipment manufacturers, the OEMs. Then you have other companies who make a chemically identical version, maybe once a patent expires. In aviation, we call these PMA parts.
PMA, Parts Manufacturer Approval.
That's it. So a company like Jet Parts Engineering isn't building the whole engine. They're engineering, say, a specific valve or a seal, getting the FAA to certify it's safe, and then selling it as an alternative to the OEM part.
I see. And I imagine the margins on that are pretty good.
They're very robust. Once you've done the engineering and paid for the certification, the actual cost to manufacture that little piece of metal is relatively low compared to what you can sell it for.
It's a great business model, but there's also a bigger industry trend driving this deal right now, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. To understand why TransDigm is making this move now, you have to look at the global fleet. The whole environment is really defined by aging aircraft.
Airlines are just keeping their jets in service for longer.
They have to. It's a necessity. New aircraft deliveries are delayed. The supply chain has been slow. Production has faced all sorts of hurdles. So airlines just can't refresh their fleets as fast as they want to.
So if you're an airline and you're waiting for a new plane that just isn't arriving, you have to keep the old one flying.
Exactly. And keeping an older plane flying is a very different game from flying a new one. It's like a car, you know? A new car just needs an oil change. A 15-year-old car, well, it might need a new transmission, new brakes, constant work. The older the asset, the more maintenance it needs.
And that brings us right back to TransDigm. They see this trend plane staying in the air longer, and they're buying the companies that make the parts to keep them going.
That's the strategic fit right there. They're targeting that commercial aftermarket revenue. This isn't about selling parts for a plane being built today. It's about selling parts for the plane built 10 years ago that needs something replaced today.
And for a buyer with TransDigm scale, this does more than just add revenue.
It does. When you're a player that size, adding these companies does a few things. First, it adds pricing power.
Because you control more of the supply of these specific parts.
Yes. TransDigm is well known for their pricing strategy. They look for parts where they're the sole source or one of very few sources. By buying Jet Parts Engineering, they're just expanding that portfolio of niche, high-margin parts.
They also expand that PMA footprint we talked about.
Correct. And by doing that, they strengthen their relationships across the board with commercial airlines, regional carriers, cargo operators. They become a more essential supplier for anyone who needs to keep a fleet moving.
It really is a calculated bet that this aging fleet dynamic is going to persist for a while.
That's the core thesis. They're betting that the demand for aftermarket support is going to stay very robust.
Okay, so let's move on to the winners in this scenario.
Yeah.
If this is the landscape, old planes, new ones delayed, high demand for parts, who benefits?
Well, the first and maybe most obvious segment would be the aftermarket consolidators.
This is the whole aftermarket wins narrative.
It's a pretty straightforward concept. As fleets get older, maintenance cycles get more intense. The companies that own the proprietary parts and have the distribution networks are just in a great position to defend their margins.
And the strategy is these bolt-on acquisitions.
That's the playbook. You buy a smaller player, you plug their products into your huge distribution network, and you compound your earnings.
TransDigm is, of course, the primary example.
Right. TransDigm Group. Ticker, TDG. They are the textbook example of this model.
Are there others that fit this description?
Yes. HEICO is another key player. Their ticker is HEI. They operate with a very similar logic. HEICO focuses heavily on that PMA market, those alternative parts. They spent decades building up a massive catalog of FAA-approved parts.
So TDG and HEI, if the thinking is that old fleets just cost more to run, these are the companies that collect on that spending.
You've got it. Which brings us to our second group of winners, the component suppliers.
So these are the companies actually manufacturing the components.
Specifically, suppliers with what we call strong spares content.
What exactly defines spares content?
It just means a good portion of their revenue comes from selling spare parts, not just from building the initial equipment. When the industry shifts to keeping planes flying longer, utilization goes up. Planes are in the air for more hours.
And higher utilization pulls forward demand for those parts.
It pulls forward demand for what we call spares-heavy components. Think about items that wear out from heat or friction or pressure. If a supplier's business is built on sending out replacement parts, they're going to see much steadier orders.
And probably a better mix of business, too.
Yes, spare parts almost always command better margins than the original equipment sale.
So who are the names to watch in this supplier category?
One would be Howmet Aerospace, ticker HWMEM. They're deeply embedded in engine components. They make things like airfoils and fasteners parts that live in really high-stress environments and just have to be replaced.
Okay, HWM and another.
Curtiss-Wright, ticker CW. They have a lot of exposure across defense and commercial aerospace where maintaining existing platforms is what really drives revenue.
All right, so we have the consolidators like TDG and HEI, and the suppliers like HWM and CW. That leaves one more group of winners.
That would be the maintenance and support providers, the MRO business.
MRO, maintenance, repair, and overhaul.
Yes. I mean, if all these parts are being bought, someone has to actually do the installation and the repair work.
Right, is the direct result of those delivery delays. Operators have to lean harder on these MRO shops to keep their older aircraft reliable and certified.
And that just raises the value of everything in that space service capacity, repair throughput, parts availability. It all becomes more valuable.
Who fits this profile?
AAR Corp is a major player here. The ticker is AAR. They provide aviation services to both commercial and government customers. They manage parts supply chains, and they do the physical maintenance work in the hangars.
And there's another name.
Textron, ticker TXT. Now, while they're known as an OEM for business jets, they have a huge service and support network. As those business jet fleets also stay at operation longer, that service division really benefits.
Okay, so AAR and TXT. That seems to round out the winners. But if suppliers and maintenance providers are making more money, that capital has to come from somewhere.
It comes from their customers, which brings us to the losers in this setup.
And first on that list, the airlines.
The problem for the airlines is pretty simple. It's higher maintenance and parts cost pressure.
If the suppliers have pricing power, the airlines are the ones paying that price.
That's it. When the aftermarket is tight, suppliers have leverage. They can raise prices, and that flows directly into the input costs for the airlines.
But what about ticket prices? They're high. Doesn't that offset the cost?
It helps, but that cost inflation still pressures margins. It becomes especially clear during what are called heavy check cycles.
Explain what happens during a heavy check.
A heavy check, or a D-check, is this massive maintenance event. The aircraft is basically stripped down to its frame for inspection and repair. It's incredibly time-consuming and very, very expensive.
And if the parts for that check now cost more?
The entire bill goes up. If the components needed for that check have all seen price increases, it directly impacts the airline's profitability for that quarter.
Which airlines are we looking at here?
Well, the legacy carriers are certainly exposed. Think about Delta Airlines, ticker DAL, and United Airlines Holdings, ticker UAL. They have huge, diverse fleets and a lot of older aircraft that require this kind of intensive upkeep.
So DAL and UAL face these cost headwinds. Who else is in a similar boat?
The cargo operators.
Companies like FedEx and UPS.
Exactly. Think about how a cargo fleet operates. They have these huge fleets that they run at very high utilization rates. They often fly older planes that have been converted from passenger service.
So they're flying old planes and they're flying them hard.
Constantly. Keeping those older planes in service just means more frequent maintenance events and higher consumption of spare parts.
And again, if suppliers have pricing power, these costs just show up on the operating expense line.
That's where you'll see it.
And the specific tickers there.
FedEx, ticker FDX, and United Parcel Service, UPS, both have massive fleets and are susceptible to these rising maintenance costs.
So the operators are feeling the pressure. But there's one more group in the losers category, and this one's a bit more nuanced.
Right. The engine and airframe OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers themselves.
Now, typically, you'd think the OEMs are in a strong position. Why are they in the loser column here?
It comes back to that one phrase we talked about at the beginning, proprietary alternative parts.
The PMA part.
Exactly. TransDigm was very clear that this acquisition is about expanding their PMA footprint. These are parts that compete directly with the parts sold by the OEM.
So if a company like GE or RTX built the engine, they want to be the one to sell you the replacement parts. But now TransDigm is offering a certified, often cheaper, alternative.
That's the dynamic. It's direct aftermarket competition. As these certified alternatives expand and gain more market share, the OEM's own aftermarket pricing power comes under pressure.
They can't just set prices in a vacuum anymore.
That's right. It creates selective competitive pressure on any part that can be substituted.
Which tickers represent the OEMs here?
You'd look at GE Aerospace, ticker GE, and also RTX, which is the parent of Pratt & Whitney. Their ticker is RTX. Now, these are huge companies, but in this specific context of rising PMA usage, they do face a competitive headwind in their very profitable aftermarket businesses.
So we've covered the deal, we've looked at the reasons behind it, and we've walked through the winners and losers. What's the trade setup takeaway here? If you're looking at this news, how should you frame it for the market?
I think the market is rewarding margin durability and recurring revenue streams. So if you accept the premise that fleets are going to stay older for longer, this headline supports a pretty specific framework. Long aftermarket, hedge the operators.
Long aftermarket, hedge the operators. Can you explain that a little more?
Sure. It suggests looking for long positions in the consolidators and those spares-exposed suppliers. Companies like TDG, HEI, HWM, you look to own the companies that are selling the parts and services.
And the hedge part of that.
You exercise caution with the airlines and cargo names. Watch for what we call cost commentary risks. When they report their earnings, you listen very closely for any comments about rising maintenance costs or parts inflation. That's where the risk is.
So, long the company selling the parts. Be careful with the companies buying the parts.
That's a good way to summarize this setup.
Before we wrap up, I just want to leave our listeners with one final thought on this whole cycle.
We're clearly in a cycle of aging fleets, and the big question to consider is this. At what point does the cost of maintaining an old fleet outweigh the delay of waiting for a new one?
That's the crucial threshold, isn't it?
It is. Right now, operators don't have much of a choice. But eventually, the math of all this maintenance might force a change in behavior. It's a fine balance the whole industry is trying to manage.
We'll have to watch how that develops.
Indeed.
This is not financial advice or buy or sell recommendations. This is purely the opinion of the author. Thanks for joining us on Breaking News to Trading Moves. We will see you next time.